What is up, guys? Rick Cactus here, and today we have an absolutely, how do I say this in a YouTube friendly way, a poop ton of Anthem information that just came out due to the most recent Anthem livestream, where the developers themselves sit down for about an hour, not only play the game, but also answer a bunch of questions at the end. So let's just jump right into this. So the first thing in terms of setting the stage on what's going on with the background gameplay, they were playing the Interceptor class, which is one of the lesser known classes. We got the official trailers, firstly with the Ranger and then with the Colossus. The Storm and the Interceptor have definitely been the ones more in the shadows in terms of information about them, but we got the Interceptor on full display today. Now, they were playing this Interceptor in a Stronghold. A Stronghold is one of the endgame activities within Anthem. Think of it somewhat as a strike from Destiny 2 with a little bit more features going on, and we'll talk about those features in a sec, but focusing on the Interceptor gameplay. What is this class all about? Well, certainly two things definitely stand out as key pillars of this particular Javelin. Number one, mobility. When using the Interceptor, you're able to dodge 3 times in a row. You can go dodge, 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 and even dodge, for example, forward, dodge to the left, and then dodge forward again, or go forward, left, left. You can change directions with these dodges, and that is its own separate ability from flying. You can, of course, just start flying around wherever you want to go. So this increased mobility, which other Javelins do not have. The Ranger has a dodge, but it's only one, definitely not 3 in a row. So this increased mobility is going to allow the Interceptor to get right into the fray behind enemies' flank really easily, and then it's got a bunch of abilities that can potentially help when it does achieve those things, when it does flank behind enemies. For example, an acid bomb we did see. Now this acid bomb, the developers were saying that this actually sets up enemies to take more damage from, everything, really. So you can flank around with the Interceptor, get a great acid bomb on a group of enemies, and then have your Colossus, for example, do a mortar pot attack on those enemies for more damage than usual. In terms of other abilities we saw with the Interceptor, we did see kind of a throwing star-esque ability, which really just seemed like, doing a little bit more damage than a normal gun or melee would. However, the second pillar of the Interceptor class is definitely a focus on melee, and we did see a lot of that in the gameplay, and although I say the throwing star was maybe doing a little bit more damage than the melee, not that much more damage. Seriously, the times when we saw the Interceptor use its mobility to flank in, get right next to an enemy, and then just start spamming melee, it did a phenomenal amount of damage. There was very little usage of actual guns the entire time through the Stronghold. It was just run up and spam melee, and that seemed amazing. It really is awesome to see a Javelin so focused on melee and have such an effective melee ability, and it really distinguishes it from the other classes. Yes, when the Colossus slams the ground, it does an AoE effect, and it certainly does a decent amount of damage, but nowhere near that damage over time, nowhere near that overall damage output than the Interceptor is capable of. But speaking of this focus on melee, we also saw that with the ultimate ability used many times throughout this Stronghold. Essentially, you whip out dual blades and you just go ham. Now, you're basically just doing your normal melee attack for that period, but you're invulnerable. You don't take, it seems like, any damage during this phase. That is insanely helpful. Firstly, it lets you do what you want to do when you're meleeing, which is just keep meleeing, and secondly, the utility of being invincible for a short period of time. You could pop it to revive teammates, you could pop it to finish objectives. You don't have to always use it to clear out ads. However, it's very effective at that. Alright, so moving on from the Interceptor and talking a little bit about the Stronghold itself, what kind of activity is that? Well, although I did say it's an end game activity, it will become available to players during the main campaign. For example, the one they were specifically playing, the developers said that it's going to be available at around level 20, the max is 30, and that's where they were doing it on. Level 20, normal difficulty. But normal difficulty is the key. You see, Strongholds are scalable into the endgame, and they actually went over the 6 different difficulties that are coming with the launch of Anthem. So throughout the normal campaign of Anthem, you're gonna have access to 3 different difficulties: easy, normal, and hard. Then, once you reach the max rank of 30, 3 additional difficulties become available: Grandmaster, Grandmaster 2, and Grandmaster 3. Essentially, think of it as torment levels from Diablo 3, if you're familiar with that game, where you can manually scale up the difficulty of most activities in the game, including strongholds, and the higher difficulties you run that activity on, the better loot you're going to get. And that's what they said with the strongholds. And that is going to be one of the big things awaiting players in Anthem's endgame, trying to do these activities while cranking up the gameplay to get the best possible rewards. And speaking of rewards, someone asked in the live stream, okay, is there going to be stronghold specific loot? And the answer was essentially not really. There's an overall loot pool of things you can get, but if you do crank up that difficulty, if you beat a stronghold on Grandmaster 3, for example, you have a much higher chance of getting masterwork items, for example. And those masterwork items are definitely tiered towards the end game. They're going to really improve your builds overall. So you want to be farming strongholds on these higher difficulties if you want a chance at those high tier items. Those high tier items can drop randomly if you're in free roam, for example, but that's very unlikely. And to me, that very much reminds me of like the Destiny 1 launch, where you had this pool of exotics and they weren't necessarily relegated to one area of the game, but you wanted to do the higher tier stuff to get them. You wanted to do Nightfalls, you wanted to do the raid, and I'm sure some of you guys remember having someone hold that area down where you would switch characters, come back in, get the chest, switch characters, come back in, get the chest. But it actually does sound like a nice split between like a D1 launch and Forsaken, where D1 launch was, a reasonable chance to get exotics, but only from those specific places, whereas Forsaken was a super low chance to get exotics from everything, right? Doing the raid or randomly killing an enemy in the wild didn't really matter. You had almost no chance. So Anthem is more going to focus on having a chance everywhere, kind of like Forsaken, but also having a much better chance for doing those much harder difficulties and completing that much harder content. But with all of that said and done, I'm sure some of you guys are wondering, is that it? Am I just going to be replaying the strongholds on high difficulties and that's all there is to the end game? Well, there's actually a little bit more. The developers mentioned that there are also going to be legendary missions and contracts that become available once you do reach that max level. So that is new content made available for you in the end game. And that's a very good sign, so it's not just replaying the same missions a la The Division when it first launched. But is that going to be it? Well, the developers actually were asked about raids, and to my surprise, answer that question pretty well. Essentially, what they said is Anthem is launching with a relatively decent endgame. However, they want to support and improve the endgame going forward. So they have a lot of post-launch support, and one of those things is improving the long tail chase, essentially, is what they referred to it as, essentially improving the endgame. And there, they mentioned really adding a raid. So they really finagled around it, and my answer sounds kind of convoluted, but essentially what they said is that Anthem is going to be getting a raid-like activity after launch. Now, they're not referring to this as a raid, but they brought all this up when asked about the raid. So clearly, when they think raid, this is the activity they have in mind. Now, how far after launch? 1 week, 1 month, several months? Well, they did say kind of sooner rather than later, so we can expect it, I would say, within a few weeks potentially. That's the time frame I think of when I hear developers say soonish, because any later than that, that's usually the time it takes for the next DLC, you know what I mean, to arrive, is a couple months. So if they're saying soonish, I would expect it to be below that time frame. And the question that obviously follows up that information is, will Anthem have enough endgame content to keep players' interest until that next endgame activity, until that raid-like activity actually launches? And then what's after that? And of course, I don't really know. I do really like the scalable difficulties. I think that's going to keep players a lot more interested than something like a Destiny, where you kind of just had, at launch, Strikes, Nightfall, Prestige Nightfall, and that's kind of it. Even the most current raid doesn't have an extra difficulty. Adding these 6 difficulties to not just Strongholds, but most activities in the game, replaying normal missions on the highest difficulty, doing those legendary contracts and legendary missions on the highest difficulty. Like, that's a lot to do for endgame players, more to do than normal. But of course, if that's the only thing like the Division, that's not so great. Hopefully, we can get that raid-style activity at the right time to keep players interested. Now, a couple more things said during the stream that I found interesting. Number 1, speaking of the end game, the developers said that the difficulties are server-side, meaning that they can add new difficulties whenever. And that's really cool. So once people start to get into the end game, once people get those end game builds and are sitting around like, now the content's easy, like we race through Grandmaster 3 no problem, the devs can say, okay, we're launching Grandmaster 4 and 5, and then those top tier players have a whole new challenge. So that's really sweet there. Another interesting thing is that BioWare is trying to emphasize team play, and so one of the things they said is that you're actually going to share in the pool of medals. And medals basically being akin to medals in most other games. You get a pentakill, you get a medal for pentakills. If you kill 100 scar heavies overall, you get that medal. And then at the end screen, like your teammate who killed 100 scar heavies and got that medal, you get the experience for that medal as well. You get the experience for your teammates' medals. So you're going to level up faster and more efficiently if you're playing as a group. The good news for you solo players out there is that everything in the game, every single activity where you're fighting enemies has matchmaking, even the strongholds we're seeing in the background gameplay. So you can always have the option to hop in with other players if you want. But guys, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Anthem content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.